Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Emily Mooney, and I'm the project lead of the Community Knowledge Program at Wellesley Institute. Before we begin, we wish to acknowledge the land on which Wellesley Institute operates. For thousands of years, it has been the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and the Mississaugas of the Credit. Today, this meeting place is still the home to many Indigenous people from all across Turtle Island, and we are grateful to have the opportunity to work on this land. Welcome to our last panel for 2025. The Community Knowledge Program aims to encourage collaborative research and knowledge sharing within the immigrant and refugee serving sector in the Greater Toronto Area. We work to fill existing gaps in how researchers, policymakers, and community agencies collaborate to conduct research and apply its findings to frontline work with newcomers. In 2021, we conducted a needs assessment to understand the gaps. One way that we're addressing them is through these panel discussions to convene leaders from different parts of the sector to speak about their experiences and perspectives on research and knowledge mobilization. Over the past few years, the Community Knowledge Program has been considering how to promote settlement research and evidence-based practice in frontline work with newcomers. We've looked at successes and challenges and begun building capacity in the sector through our public webinars, training for frontline workers, and a new community of practice to support researchers, practitioners, and others engaged in supporting newcomers to our area. Today, we'll take a look back at the Community Knowledge Program through the past 5 years and discuss the program's legacy and how its work can continue even as the program itself winds to a close. We'll also speak with Farishta Dinshaw and Vince Pietropaolo from COSTI Immigrant Services from the Family and Mental Health Center about their research and settlement work in the GTA. Before we get to the speakers, I'd like to go through a few housekeeping notes. Please keep in mind that the webinar is being recorded. The video and the transcript will be available on our website next week. If you need subtitles, you can enable live transcription by going to the meeting controls at the top of the screen and selecting more options than language and speech, and then turn on live captions. Please note that the chat function is enabled for this event, but we do encourage you to use the Q&A function to participate. We're going to start with some presentations, and then we'll come back together for questions afterwards. We have two wonderful panelists that we'll hear from today. First, I will give a presentation about the history of the program, and then we'll hear from the panelists. Farishta Dinshaw works as a community engagement and knowledge mobilization lead at COSTI Immigrant Services, Toronto, where she raises awareness about gambling, gaming, excessive technology use, family violence, and mental health issues within immigration, refugee, ethnocultural, and racialized communities in Ontario. She coordinates the Neighbors, Friends, and Families project at COSTI. It's an Ontario-wide campaign to raise awareness about the signs of women abuse and prevent and promote bystander intervention. She's also an adjunct professor in the graduate program in immigration and settlement at the Toronto Metropolitan University. Before immigrating to Canada, Farishta's work experience in Pakistan included teacher education, community development, resource development, and research. We will also hear from Vince Pietropaolo. Vince is the general manager of COSTI's Family and Mental Health Services. In his current position, he works with ethnocultural communities in program design, development, research, and implementation in the areas of mental health, gender-based violence, problem gambling, and excessive technology use and dementia. Vince currently sits on the York Region Violence Against Women Coordinating Committee, Ontario Resource Group on Gambling, Ethnicity, and Culture, the North York Specialized Courts Advisory Committee, and the National Trauma-Informed Care Project National Advisory Committee. He is also a member of the Canadian Dementia Learning and Resource Network. Vince is a subject matter expert on the Immigrant and Refugee Mental Health Project at CAMH, and recently he designed and implemented the Refugee Mental Health Program and the Seniors Dementia Day Program at COSTI. I'm very much looking forward to the discussion today, and I will start by talking a little bit about the Community Knowledge Program's legacy. Can everybody see this okay? Okay. All right. So, um, looking back, looking forward, first of all, I'd like to thank you all for joining us today. And note that this will be available on the website. The Community Knowledge Program, what is it? It is an initiative to foster collaborative research and sharing of knowledge within the immigrant and refugee serving sector in the Greater Toronto Area. It was started um, because access to high quality research is absolutely necessary to the creation of effective policy, service, and advocacy in the immigrant and refugee serving sector. We need to know what people need. If we don't know what people's needs are, we can't meet them. The Community Knowledge Program is a legacy of the Center of Excellence for Research on Immigration and Settlement, which was a network of researchers, policymakers, and practitioners working in the field of migration and settlement in Ontario. It was a knowledge exchange hub and a funder for all the three communities, the researchers, the policymakers, and the practitioners. And it worked in the interest of all migrants and the general public. Quite a bit of research was conducted under the auspices of CIRIS. But because of funding cuts, which we will hear more about today, it ceased operations in August of 2019. So the Community Knowledge Program was given to Wellesley Institute as a legacy of CIRIS. I began work with the Community Knowledge Program in 2020. And since then, we have conducted a needs assessment to understand the state of research in the sector and where the gaps are and potential ways to fill them. We have produced a 6-module online training course for frontline settlement workers. We've had this and other public panel events, and we are working on building a new community of practice. I will talk more about each of these as we get further into the presentation. For the needs assessment, we had two main questions. What knowledge does the immigrant and refugee serving sector need? And what are the best ways to share this knowledge? So this is looking at both research and knowledge mobilization, which have been core to this program. During the needs assessment, we talked to senior academic leaders at 4 universities. We talked to academic researchers. We talked to frontline workers and senior leaders at community agencies. We talked to senior leaders at umbrella organizations such as OCASI, and the local immigration partnerships. We spoke with an independent communications consultant who has specialized in migration and settlement for quite some time. We spoke with representatives from IRCC and the City of Toronto. This broad approach with a wide variety of voices has been central to how we've planned our webinars as well. And we want to bring in many different perspectives. We want to have different people talking about their different experiences and needs to give a more complete picture of what's needed and how to fill those needs. What we heard from the people we consulted were that obviously gaps exist between research and practice. We learned that timely research and knowledge mobilization are critical in designing and offering settlement programs and services. We learned that in-person and interactive events are much preferred for sharing and acquiring new knowledge. In-person events have been a lot slower since 2020, but whenever we can to get together, I think we all know that the connections that we can make in person are priceless. And interaction as well. People tend to retain more information when they have a chance to interact with it. Many challenges exist, and in the discussion, we will hear about some of those directly. There are challenges within the sector, competition for funding, um, funding cuts, and between different parts of the sector. Different people have different agendas. So part of the work here is learning how to reconcile these different agendas. But the good news is there are ways to close these gaps. Why do they exist? Well, there are several possible causes: the institutional structures, the relationships among funders, academic researchers, and community agencies. There can often be imbalances of power about who gets to decide how the funds are spent. Um, there can be a lack of capacity within community agencies to engage in or with research. We heard a lot about how people who were able to engage in research work had to do it off the side of their desk. I know that's a phrase we hear a lot. Um, so there need to be institutional structures in place for people to take time each week or each month or at regular intervals to look at some of the research that's being done, to think about how they can incorporate it into their frontline services, and even how people can engage in conducting research themselves. Lack of capacity within community agencies, we have also tried to address with our training, so that people have a basic idea of what they are getting involved in and how it works. Also, gaps exist because there's often a lack of formal recognition of research work done within communities. There are a lot of great community organizations out there producing top quality research and reports and so forth. And because it is not in the academic literature, it's often not taken as seriously. So these are some of the ways that Wellesley Institute has been working to close these gaps through the Community Knowledge Program. We have a training course, as I will describe it in a little bit more detail in a moment. We've had these public panel discussions and the new community of practice. I'll talk about each of these in turn. First of all, the training that we have developed. We developed a new 6-module online course. It is hosted at CAMH. It is interactive. It is self-paced. We have been offering it in different cohorts. And I'll describe first a bit about what the training contains. The first online module is about why research is important and what some getting of the lay of the land for how research interacts with frontline work with newcomers to Canada. The second module considers a lot about the ethics and relationships for research, and relationships are definitely something that we have learned a lot about and focused on as well in our webinars. Third module considers the purposes of research. Why do it? The methods. How do you do it? What method is appropriate for what kind of question? We talk in the fourth module about the research process. How do you recruit participants? How do you develop your research question? Not necessarily in that order. How do you collect the data and engage with it and share the analysis? This is getting into the fifth module, collecting the data, analyzing it, to understand some of the bigger trends. And then finally, the last module is about sharing your research results, knowledge mobilization. And we will hear from Vince and Farishta about how they do this. But the training offers information about like basic introduction to all of this. The idea is to give participants in the training the language they will need to interact with people who focus on research as their careers, uh, introducing the concepts that people need, such as the difference between qualitative and quantitative research, what kind of sampling to use, how to choose your participants. There's a lot of very practical information that people who are working on the front lines in agencies can apply directly to the work they do. So far, we have had 6 cohorts of students. One just finished last week. We are having one more in March, and then the training will continue to be available as a purely self-directed through the Immigrant and Refugee Mental Health Program at CAMH. The reviews of the training have been very positive. Here are some samples of what people had to say about it. I appreciated that it was designed around frontline workers' day-to-day experiences with research. This is one of the things that we tried to keep in mind as we were developing the training. How can we make it relevant to the work that frontline settlement workers are doing in their day-to-day jobs? Another commenter said, overall, my experience with the course on research and frontline work with newcomers to Canada has been incredibly insightful and enriching. And I'm very pleased with this last one because this was very much the goal of what we wanted to do. I loved that I now have step-by-step knowledge to conduct the research that will help my organization create programming tailored to the specific audience. So that covers the training, what we've learned from our webinars. Again, we have heard from a very wide variety of people. We tried in each webinar to bring in somebody from academia, somebody from a community agency, and somebody with a unique and different perspective on the topic that we have covered. So we've heard from academic researchers, professors, postdoctoral fellows, graduate students, even in one case, an undergraduate student who's working as a research assistant with a professor at the University of Toronto. We've heard from community leaders, agency management, staff, grassroots organizers, people who run the local immigration partnerships across the city. And we've heard from independent consultants and community members as well. So we've tried to bring in a broad variety of perspectives. What we have heard about is we've covered a broad variety of topics. We heard about how immigration status as a foundational social determinant of health that determines access to so many other things, how it determines access to healthcare, employment, and many other things. We heard about barriers and supports for equity deserving groups. We focused on several different equity deserving groups over the course of the webinars. LGBTQIA plus newcomers, newcomers living with disabilities, newcomers affected by gender-based violence. We focused quite a lot. We had 2 webinars on this topic about how to build and maintain successful research partnerships. How do you work with other people and other organizations to ensure that there is a good balance among the a balance of power between whoever's funding the research often and whoever is directly engaged in conducting it. And we are also engaged, another topic of the webinar was in ways to share knowledge and combat misinformation in newcomer communities, specifically focusing on COVID-19. So the webinars today, we will be winding up a lot of those discussions and looking at some practical examples of research and knowledge mobilization from a community agency that's been directly involved in both. And finally, our community of practice. What is a community of practice? There are a couple of people, they're married. They've been doing a lot of work on communities of practice for a long time now. And 10 years ago, they came up with this definition. They're groups of people who share a concern or a passion for something they do and learn how to do it better as they interact regularly. So there's a couple of important features here. It's a group of people. They share a concern or they share a passion. So they're all engaged in the same kind of work and they want to do it well. And then learning how to do it better. Learning is central to communities of practice. And then regular interaction, getting people together to discuss what they're working on, what they're interested in, what they want to hear, what they want to know. The idea is that it is an iterative process, people coming together, learning from each other, teaching each other, and eventually, over time, building those connections, building those relationships that will enable them to engage in more successful, focused research on immigrants and refugees in order to serve them better. Who would want to be involved in a community of practice? Researchers want to learn about what's happening on frontline work. What's going on in the agencies? What are people seeing? Are there any patterns about the types of service seekers who are coming to the agencies? What are some of the issues and challenges that they are facing, and what kind of supports would be appropriate to help them with these? Sharing findings. Researchers want others to know about the work they've been doing. So here we talk about knowledge mobilization. Researchers also want to influence policy. How can we influence the structural and government level approaches to immigration and settlement in order to make sure that people have the best possible settlement outcomes? Community agencies want evidence. They want to know about evidence-based practices. What works? What doesn't work? Where is it most effective to spend time and resources? They want to have a voice in research. They want to be there from the beginning, developing the research questions, engaging their communities, and making sure that their views and voices are reflected in the final products. They also want to influence policy. They want to make sure that the policymakers know what is happening on the front lines and direct their resources accordingly. And the policymakers want this too. They want to make sure that the policy is well informed and that their funds are being used effectively. So there are a number of places where you can connect with others who are engaged in this work. The National Newcomer Navigation Network, N4, at the Children's Hospital of Eastern Ontario. If you look up National Newcomer Navigation Network, you will find a large number of resources available. They have a fairly big staff, so they have been providing places for discussion. They have been providing many webinars, and this is an excellent place to come together and learn about what's happening with research in the sector. And perhaps Vince can talk about this a bit more when he speaks. The Immigrant and Refugee Mental Health Project at CAMH. They have a course that has had thousands of people come through, and they are all in the community of practice that has arisen around that project as well. Settlenet.org at OCASI, funded by IRCC as a national information site and place for discussions, can be a useful place to learn about what is going on in the sector and connecting with others who might be interested in the same topics that you are. There are Pathways to Prosperity with their annual conference. and they have a number of resources on their website as well. Circ Migration, the Canada Excellence Research Chair at, no, sorry, Circ Migration at TMU is a large and very well-funded project that's turning out amazing work. They have also webinars, knowledge mobilization. There's a great deal to be learned from the Circ Migration folks. You can help build this community of practice by attending events, OCASI's biannual professional development conference and the executive directors forum, the P2P conference, the Metropolis conference, which covers a lot of the research that has been done recently in the field. The Canadian Association for Refugee and Forced Migration Studies conference is also a useful place to learn about what's happening and what kind of work people have been doing. And then the webinars that I mentioned previously, the N4 webinars, OCASI, Circ Migration. Also, there is an extremely useful resource available directly from IRCC. They send out emails about once a week. It's called Research at a Glance. And I will be posting in the chat the easiest way to sign up for this. So what's next? And we'll be using these questions after Vince and Farishta speak to help shape the discussion to understand your needs. What do you need from a community of practice and from your fellow researchers and practitioners in the immigrant and refugee serving sector? What would you like to see? What kind of supports would you like? What kind of resources would you like to be available? And how can you help make this happen? Okay, thank you. That concludes my presentation, and let's move on to Farishta now, who will talk about some of the work that she has been doing in research and knowledge mobilization. Thank you very much for joining us today, Farishta. I'm very glad you're here.
Thank you, Emily, and thank you for having us over to talk about the kind of community-based research that we do at COSTI. I'm going to talk about two projects that we are working on. One we've completed just recently. We at COSTI, as you mentioned earlier, work around at the Family and Mental Health Services. We do work around domestic violence and intimate partner violence, counseling and awareness raising, particularly around help seeking, encouraging help seeking. And we've always had this, the question at the back of our head that what is the best model to work with newcomer communities? We have now expanded our base to include immigrant, refugee, ethnocultural, and racialized communities, because it's not just about the newcomer communities, which, as you know, IRCC has very specific time limitations for services to them. So, and we know from practice that clients keep on coming way past the 3-year mark. So we recognize that ethnocultural and racialized communities and members of those communities need services as well. So we've expanded our community group, so to speak. And we were wondering what is the best way to help women from these communities who are facing gender-based violence. And so we did a research project. It was a 3-year research project with examining two different models of service. One was, like COSTI, a single agency model that had a variety of services, including housing, settlement services, plus counseling, legal help when needed. And we also examined and explored where a hub model would work, where multiple agencies would get together and share their resources and work in tandem with one another to serve the community. So under one roof, they would necessarily have counseling services, maybe legal services, law enforcement, court services, child protection, and to see whether which model worked best. And surprisingly, it came across that every model had its own challenges and its benefits. But what we were able to cull out of this project was that for a project, for any program and services for women from immigrant, refugee, ethnocultural, and racialized communities, for that to be successful, you needed four core principles. And this was across the board. And we did a lot of conversations with frontline staff, with management of agencies across Southern Ontario. We did focus groups with people with lived experience from different ethnocultural backgrounds, language backgrounds, women with disabilities. And it really boiled down to these four principles that we've put together into a blueprint for establishing services for immigrants, refugee, ethnocultural, and racialized women, who are facing intimate partner violence. And that blueprint, we are hoping that that would become a national blueprint. It was funded by wages for women and um, WINS, help. Wage stands for Women and Equity
So, sorry,
and
you
Gender
were saying
Equity.
yes. Okay, go ahead.
Yes, so women and gender equity, it's a federal ministry, and it was funded by them. And we're hoping that it would, since it's a federal ministry, that it would become a nationwide project and would help anyone who is seeking to establish services. So that was this one really, it was the culmination of those 3 years into this blueprint is really valuable because very often you end up doing research in the community. First of all, it's small because you don't necessarily get the kind of funding to do it over a multiple year period. And so the fact that we had this kind of opportunity to do this and engage, 5 different organizations across Southern Ontario made the difference in coming up with something that is practical, something that is replicable, something that we can share and is useful across Canada. And I think that speaks again. I guess when we talk about challenges, it speaks to the idea of you have to have buy-in from you know every stakeholder in the project. But I guess we can talk a little bit more about that later on. The other project that I wanted to talk about actually uh, is still in the stage where we're envisioning it. And I think that is the reason why I want to talk about it, because it came up in a very interesting way. We had a speaker from the Canadian Anti-Hate Network present at one of our conferences that we did, one of our knowledge mobilization programs that we did. And they mentioned that they are seeing radicalization of youth uh, through gaming sites. And because a lot of the gaming sites are not, parents, when they see that children that they are on gaming sites, it doesn't give them a sort of a red flag alert that this is something that we need to monitor because they see gaming as an exercise. They may complain if this person is gaming all day, all night kind of thing, but they see it as innocuous. But when we heard that this is an issue, we actually started having this conversation within COSTI and with our partners about we should be exploring this more because one of the things that we are recognizing is that, and we have explored this more about who are we targeting in terms of our services. So, and research sort of helps figure those things out because we know that a lot of people who are gambling and gaming are not the ones who are coming in to seek help. It is the people who are impacted in their families, parents, siblings, children who seek services about, I don't know how to help the person who is gambling, or I don't know how help the person who spends 10 hours a day, gaming and is ignoring schoolwork, for example. So being able to have information, evidence-based information that we can use to target services for parents, helping them recognize, the challenges, what they should be looking out for, what the red flags are, how to help them have communication, because that comes up again and again when we have focus groups or, we have conversations with our clients around, like, I don't know how to talk to my teenager about gambling or gaming or excessive technology use or online shopping and all sorts of issues. And so I think from what we are talking about within our services is that we are now actually expanding our services and our programming and our knowledge mobilization events to include parents who were or families that were generally, we were not targeting them directly before. We were always targeting about, okay, you need the services, come to our organization for services for yourself. Now it's more roundabout, but ultimately it does impact the person who is gambling or is in an abusive situation. So that's really something really exciting that's going on right now. It's just started. We don't know in which direction it's going to go. We are approaching, the three big universities over here to see if they would be willing to partner with us in this project. As I said, I was just talking about one project that's completed and one project that's just started.
Okay, that's great, Farishta. Thank you. There's a lot of richness in what you have just said and talked about. There are a couple of concepts I'd really like to pull out and highlight. For example, what you said about the work being practical, replicable, and easy to share. And I think that's something that all researchers would do well to keep in mind as they are doing their work and sharing their information. Another thing that you mentioned was needing to have buy-in from every stakeholder. And this is absolutely crucial. You're not going to get anywhere unless everybody is on board. And there's so much negotiation and back and forth that needs to happen for that. Um, so you also mentioned that you are approaching three different universities, and I'd like to get into this a bit more in the discussion after we've given Vince a chance to speak about the partnerships and how you approach the universities and how you would build and sustain relationships with them over time. So thank you very much for some really interesting information, and we'll continue to build on it, and I'll turn things over to Vince.
Thank you, Emily. Thank you for inviting me to speak and having the opportunity to talk about some of the projects that at COSTI as well, where I work with Farishta, we've worked on. I'm going to highlight three projects that have been more recent. The first was a project and a research project that was funded by Public Health Canada, and this was a COSTI-led research. And what we wanted to do was an evaluation research project where we wanted to evaluate a current program. We were serving immigrants who had an early diagnosis of dementia. And what we needed to find out was, and we knew anecdotally that developing a project or a seniors day program that was focused on language and focused on cultural activities, if that would, what was the impact? And as I suggested anecdotally, we knew that there were strong benefits, that it perhaps would slow down And this was the feedback of the progress of the disease. This is the feedback we were getting from family members who were coming to our caregiver stress group. And this is also the observations of the PSWs and of the social workers working with the individuals with dementia. So we were able to secure the funding, and we invited a number of different organizations who also had groups or senior day programming that again were focused on language and we're able through questionnaires and collectively work with academics as well. So we had an advisory group that comprised of medical professionals, professionals working a neurologist, psychiatrist, as well as professors and of social work from University of Toronto, and of course we had members of the community to participate as well. So we were working with ethno specific agencies, and we worked together to come up with the questionnaires to look at how. The questions can give us the kinds of information, or at least affirm or validate some of the work we were doing. So that was a wonderful project, and we were able to get really good information and knowledge that we used for two ways. One, we used to, again, promote our work into the community and developing the messages and the importance of, but also was to advocate to funders to fund ethno-specific programming because there definitely it was advantageous, it reaffirmed our work, and really making a difference in the lives of immigrants. So that was one project. The next project was a project that was led by CAMH, and it was funded through IRCC. And this was a project to evaluate the RAP program. And the RAP program is a program that currently works with refugees and when they are first settled into Canada when they arrived, and there are RAP programming across Ontario and across Canada. And of course, the design came from CAMH, and it invited community partners. COSTI was one. There was an agency in London who had a RAP program. And I can't remember off the top of my head the third agency, but essentially it focused on a Ontario-wide um, partnership. And it was a wonderful opportunity for us because, again, it was another evaluative study that looked at, they wanted to develop and test the model, the RAP model, to identify clients. And these are refugee clients who were experiencing mental distress and essentially provide them with tools and resources to reduce client mental stress. And again, there was an advisory group made up of the community partners. There was expertise. I think Dr. McKenzie worked on this particular project. This was with the Equity and Health Center at CAMH. Again, it was a wonderful experience. IRCC funded, and it informed the work we did. So we used some of the results again to employ some tools to help RAP workers better identify. So it really was a wonderful project. And not only did it evaluate the specific current service delivery model to refugees, but out of that work came the ability to identify tools that then can be used by RAP workers to really serve our client population better. So that was a really applicable piece of research that through the analyzation and through the study and the evaluation, tools came out and it really improved the overall service delivery. The third project, which I think is very, very unique because it wasn't funded, and this was a COSTI collaboration with York University and the Refugee Studies Center. And we had three professors, one who was a retired dean of York University and the Refugee Studies Center, two faculty members, and then some of the senior staff at COSTI. And what we did there is what was identified, we were having high turnover at COSTI, and also we were getting feedback from workers who were working with refugee population about the toll it was taking on them psychologically, physically, So we wanted as an organization to learn more about what we can do on many different levels, from an organizational level, from a system level, um, how we can improve and help and support the individuals working with refugee population. And again, so this was in-kind contribution where we would meet and develop questions, and we use students, graduate students from York University that were supervised by one of the professors, and again developed the questionnaires, and we surveyed refugee RAP workers and settlement workers and CSS workers, who are client support workers, all working with refugees, and mental health social workers working with refugees. And they were able to provide feedback, as well as managers and senior um, leaders in the organization, to look at what kind of improvements they could make to support self-care, and also to make some organizational changes in reducing turnover, and supporting the work that all individuals across the organization who are working with refugees can do. So again, this work not only gave us good information that we could implement. So what came out of that study as well were things like people were feeling their work was not validated, they were not compensated appropriately. So this was really, really important for the organization as a whole, to look at salary structures for people working, and then also implementing self-care programming within the particular program itself. So anyway, it was really, really helpful. And it's one that we then presented to one of the conferences. And I think the conference was hosted by the YMCA. They host an annual conference for settlement workers. So this was wonderful in that it was disseminated. Now, some of the challenges I feel is often with community-based research, and I think you had noted this, Emily, is that the research is not doesn't have the same credibility unless the led by academics, right? So the credit becomes an issue of credibility, and it's not taken as seriously as you mentioned. But he also is very difficult, again, to disseminate and have this information used apart from maybe the community agencies involved. It's really difficult to disseminate. We've tried at COSTI, but sometimes we're limited by funds to present at conferences, or maybe we'll send abstracts, but we're very, very limited in that way. Again, it's because of the funding, and also limited because there isn't room often in many of the conferences to have community-based research as something that would be helpful, or at least make the agenda items of that particular conference. So these are some of the things that we've seen. Those are some of the projects that we've recently been working on. And I think you wanted me to mention or talk about CAMH's Immigration and Refugee Project. Do you want me to do that now, or do you have some specific questions you want me to address?
I think talking about the project right now would be fine,
Right. So this
and
is a
we'll get into
one.
questions.
Okay. So this is a wonderfully funded project. It's been active. I think I've been involved for about the last 5 or 6 years. I think it's been on a little bit longer. I've had the opportunity again to use um, some of my work experience in areas where I've developed knowledge, to pass that knowledge on through webinars that the project hosts. So the project is a national project, and it supports settlement workers by offering a course to enhance their skills and build on their knowledge. But what is unique about it is that we have many different experts in the field working in migration and settlement studies, in mental health. So you were really broadening, and it's all free. This is the wonderful thing, because there aren't very many, there isn't a lot of funding available for settlement workers or workers working with immigrant and refugee communities for staff development. So this is why this project is so valuable. It is doesn't take up a lot of time, and it really develops an opportunity for And historically, there's been high turnover in settlement, possibly to do with the lack of compensation. So it helps new workers come in, but it also builds knowledge and skills from workers who have been in the field for many, many years. And like I said, we've had many different speakers with all kinds of expertise, from mental health to migration to refugee and all and trauma care principles. So it really, really works with developing the skills and the knowledge base. And I'm really proud to have been a participant and work with that particular project. It's one that I think has been highly successful for good reason.
Hey, thank you so much, Vince. Very much appreciated, and it's great to hear about the work you've been doing. There are a few things, again, that I would like to draw out because you talked about some incredible work, and I would like to frame it in the larger context of like research and knowledge mobilization more generally within the sector. Um, so one thing that I heard when in what you were saying, you talked a lot about um, how the frontline folks are noticing particular topics that they would like to talk about, that they would like to know more about. And I think this is at the heart of successful research projects is involving the people who are on the front lines, consulting them, giving them time and space to say, what are you seeing? What are you noticing? What are some of the patterns that are coming up? Is this something that we need to look into? You talked about an existing program that you evaluated, which covers the evaluative function of research, which is quite a common reason that many people participate in it at all, the community agencies. Even I think a lot of people don't realize when they're giving the questionnaires at the end of the event, like this is research. Evaluation is a form of research. So, you talked about being the lead agency on a program. You talked about being a partner, a community partner, working with CAMH. So you've had experience in different kinds of research relationships. And you also talked about the role of funding. So you had adequate funding for the first two projects, but then the third one was unfunded. And excuse me, as we get into the discussion, I would like to hear more about how, especially the unfunded one worked, because we all know that there is not a lot of funding available these days. So how do we continue this work with minimal resources? Okay, thank you for a really interesting discussion of the work you've been doing. It sounds like it's having a big impact, and that's great to hear. Okay, so I'd like to open up the floor for some discussion now. If anyone has any of our participants have any questions or anything they would like to hear discussed more from what we've heard from our two panelists today. I'll give a minute for you to think about it. You can post your questions in the Q&A. And I see one here from Mario Kala is raising his hand. Yes, Mario.
Hi, can you hear me, Emily?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, good, good. Hello, Vince and Farishta. Good to see you again. I want to pick up on the one thing that I think isn't being done very well is the dissemination of the research. I think, Emily, you touched on this when you talked about, the research purposes, the practical applied aspect and the policy aspect. But especially in the practical aspect, I think of, some of the research that we have seen, the significance of it. For example, one piece of research years ago that basically evaluated resumes of people and job search for internationally trained immigrants. And it discovered that employers tend to discount a person's qualifications by about 70%, whether educational or experiential. And but the reason I mentioned this in terms of the impact of this is that the thing that they also found was that if the individual had even one course at a Canadian school, it reversed that discounting. It's as if the employer then looks at this and you know, you might have, let's say, a degree from the University of Santiago or the University of Tehran, but and you can get from Wes, you know, validation and assessment of it, but you have that assessment, but how good is your English for this kind of position? How, you know, how integrated are you in understanding Canadian culture? If you take a course, let's say at George Brown or Seneca or wherever, it's as if the employer says, oh, they got through this course, they must be okay. And suddenly it gets reversed. So what we did was we communicated this to all of our employment consultants so that then they could encourage, this is the practical aspect of it, right? So that then they could encourage their clients to take a course or to volunteer. That also has been a very winning approach. And so that's the impact. So the question then is, you know, I came upon this by chance through my work at COSTI at the time. But, you know, if there was a way to disseminate, not the whole research, people get a little bit, you know, blurry-eyed looking at some of these studies. But to have a very succinct thing that says, here are the issues, these are the findings, here is the impact for settlement workers. And so it's the dissemination piece, having something a little more systemic through the system, whether it's through OCASI or whomever. So that's in terms of the professionals in the field. But then in terms of getting the information to our clients, I little alarmed hearing Farishta talk about the radicalization of youth through gaming sites, because my grandkids are on gaming sites. And I'm thinking, oh boy, what are they hearing on these gaming sites? So, you know, unpacking that and how do we communicate this to parents? Because it's not just a fun thing that they're doing. There's other information, obviously, that they're gaining from that. So anyway, I think there's, you know, lots of implications. We're lucky in Canada that we have research capability. We have systems approach in terms of settlement work and so on, but it's this whole dissemination of the information that troubles me. Thank you for a very stimulating conversation this morning.
Thank you very much, Mario. That's a fascinating point, and I think it really touches on some of the work that we've been trying to do at Community Knowledge Program, as well as what Farishta is dedicated to doing with her knowledge mobilization position. Yeah, Farishta.
Just to add a little bit of layer to this point that Mario raised, is how, so when we are trying to disseminate information around responsible gaming and gaming risks, we are working with our community partners who work with certain specific ethnocultural and ethno-linguistic groups. And one of the things we're recognizing is that a lot of the people who are working in agencies may be of a different age group. So we are not necessary. So when we have our meetings about how where do we target, we say, oh, we could do this as an Instagram post, or as, you know, let's use social media. And so we're talking Facebook and LinkedIn and things like that, which ages us, while youth are using completely different platforms, you know, and not only that, when we were talking with our community partners who work with Mandarin and Cantonese speaking clients, they have their own forums and platforms of communication. They are not on English language or the more Western platforms that we imagine or think about. And then targeting messaging that we come up with is very different when we talk targeting messages for a different community. There are so many cultural taboos. There are issues around, for example, in terms of, we were talking about gambling messaging and about responsible gambling, but you can't always touch on things like luck and chance, which may be very, very ingrained in certain communities and related to the festivals that they have. The So it's almost saying that we are diminishing all the belief systems that you have by saying that gambling is based on luck. So we have to be so careful that messages get lost in translation. So very valid to what Maria was saying is it's not just about the message, dissemination platforms, but it is understanding the cultural nuances of the language that you speak. We were recently having a conversation about messaging around gender-based violence and intimate partner violence in particular. And there was so many conversations. It was such an interesting conversation because there was one group of people who were saying, "Oh, um, I think it works better if the message comes across from a doctor or a lawyer." And because they are seen as people with authority, if somebody says, has a social worker label attached to them, people are going to dismiss that messaging that, oh, they're just there to break up families. So again, it's just not about the message itself, it's how it's delivered, what are the nuances. So it's a topic for its own, to be discussed.
That's a huge one. Yes, that is a huge one. Yeah, talking how the message is received depends on who is delivering it and how. Yeah. And I think Mario touched on something very important here as well. There is all this tremendous research work happening in community agencies. Even evaluations of programs would be useful information for other agencies doing similar work. But over and over again, over the past 5 years, a thing that's kept coming up is everybody's working in silos. And working with Dr. Michaela Hinia from York University, she's been quite involved in this program and will be presenting a workshop at the CAR FMS conference about the work that we've been doing to build a community of practice. She has talked a lot about the difficulty sustaining this work, getting the people out of silos. Well, we've been talking about this for many years, and it's starting to get a bit better. But Farishta, as you were mentioning, the clients would be on different platforms, the big Chinese community on WeChat, and so many others. A lot of young people are on Discord and Twitch. And how do we there are different groups. I'd like to make this a bit more granular as well. There are different groups that we will need to mobilize information to. There are the agencies themselves for helping them design their programs and services. There are the folks who are seeking services and who need information, for example, about COVID-19. Some of the previous webinars that we've held, one was about innovative approaches to knowledge mobilization. So there's a lot of people doing good work in this area, people doing things like Photo Voice and the Ward Museum. Yeah, and that's all online, so it's easily accessible. The stories of so many newcomers and what folks have been doing. Yeah. Uh, so we had somebody from the Ward Museum come and talk in our webinar about what they're doing. So I guess what I'd like to move the conversation toward is how do we continue to build and sustain relationships among community agencies across organizations and universities and funders to produce this high quality research and then share the results. What else can we do that we're not already doing? And I don't have any easy answers to that, and I don't think anyone else here will either, but I think we could do some brainstorming. Vince, you turned on your mic.
Well, I think there's a lot of good things we already do, and for instance, having committees like LIP, having OCASI, umbrella organizations that bring people together, um, and relationships. For instance, I can speak from my experience at COSTI. We've been working with certain specific agencies for many, many years on all kinds of different projects, thinking about whenever we're writing proposals, even program level proposals and not research based, of how to include and partner, right? That the work should not be done alone. And keep it in mind as much as possible to try to compensate, right? Now, there's a lot, one of the great things about, and not only just in community-based organizations, but also you mentioned Dr. Michaela Heine. She's been wonderful. She donates her time, sits on committees, um, is an incredible, approachable professor who wants to do work, and there's many others. There is um, I've sort of the professor from who's approached us many times from U of T and Farishta, Dr. T Zhang, who's been wonderful. So there are eager individuals and institutions who will donate their time and will work with community agencies. And it also just takes opportunities to network. One of the values that I see is never underestimate um, the opportunities when you go to conferences to mix with academics, policymakers, funders, and get to know people. So that takes a little bit just using your social skills. And that's how both me and First work very, very closely together. We've often just gone and approached people that we've never known, academics, policymakers, and have said, look, would you like to speak at a conference we're doing as we're hosting a webinar or we're thinking about a particular project? And we've had some heavy hitters take part in some of our advisory committees. I can tell a story recently. So it's just essentially sometimes approaching people um, who have knowledge, expertise, or specific skills will donate their time because they're really, really, I think, enthused and really committed to the particular social justice issue. Now, Mario Calla was our executive director for many years at COSTI, sorry. To see him take part in this it touches my heart because it means he's still active, even in his retirement, still interested. So people like that, right, who've made connections, experienced, and definitely will be committed. So wherever you can make connections, I think at any time, and make use of network opportunities. And we don't have to chase money all the time as much as it makes things easier. We've so the project that first I just want to highlight the one she talked about, which looking at how um, vulnerable young gamers are being radicalized. And this is something, by the way, that Steve Bannon picked up on to mobilize voters, right? This is in way back in I think 2016. He realized there's a whole bunch of gamers out there that you can use this space to try to influence. And he referenced this in the book that Steve Bannon wrote on how to mobilize people to go out and vote, right? And how to get them to vote in a certain way. I don't want to get political, but nevertheless, this was funded. We use students, right? That Farishta sort of in the class that Farishta teaches, and we looked at just dedicating our own staff and time and sort of carving out space. So we're trying to generate knowledge because funds were not available really. So whatever existing funds that we could leverage from our programming, which wasn't very much, and just the in-kind contribution of staff willing to look at this, because this is a very serious issue. Um, as Mario noted, right? He has grandkids who are gaming, right? So we need to know what else is going on. So these are just some ways I think that come to mind for me as I think about ways to really, especially times are tough now, right? That there is some funding limitations, right? And as the government sort of makes cuts, and other, so also looking at foundations as well. There's many foundations that will fund certain research. The only concern I have is rarely are immigrant and refugee populations priorities, right? In many, and that's where it is a real big challenge. So I'll leave it at that. If anybody else has any other comments or that they would like to make with respect to that.
Thank you, Vince. I see a question in the Q&A section from Maria Gomez saying, it seems that the information collected is mostly from Ontario agencies. So when you talk about settlement agencies, I believe that the study should explain what was covered and avoid generalization as things may be different in other provinces. And I completely agree with this. The community knowledge program has been focused on the Greater Toronto area because that was our mandate from the funder. But there is amazing settlement work happening across the province. Our training has been taken by people up in like Whitehorse and Yellowknife and all over the country. So, but I think it is important to make that distinction between something that would work for a specific ethnocultural community in North York, for example, might be completely different from what is needed for a small community in rural Manitoba, for example. So, yeah, and this gets back to what Farishta was saying about how many layers there are to all of this. But fortunately, we have smart and talented people out there in the sector who are willing to help tease them apart. Okay. Any other comments or questions from any of the participants? I'm not hearing anything. I'd like to know what kind of advice would you give to other community organizations who want to engage in research work, but don't necessarily have the partnerships with the universities, don't have perhaps the staff members who are trained and qualified to engage in research? What advice would you give them?
May I? So one of the things that actually I'm gonna let Mario answer it. I saw his. I'm gonna let him go first. Go ahead, Mario, if that's okay, Emily.
Oh, if you're going to let me butt in, Vince,
Absolutely.
that's fine. I'll jump in. It's a really good question, Emily, because I think it costs the, and maybe we can learn from that experience. Vince touched on it. Partly it's attending to professional development conferences where you're going to meet, professors who are doing this research and building relationships, because they're usually looking for the, the basically they're looking for the data being our clients in a sense when they're doing the research. And so they're looking for partnerships with organizations. And so partly it's building relationships with others. But I think the big challenge for most agencies is that they are so busy in doing the day-to-day settlement work that they don't have the capacity for this type of thing. I think that if an organization is serious, it's really about carving out a little time for someone to take the lead to do this. At COSTI, we've been lucky that we actually besides having Farishta and Vince, who are well connected now to various institutions, research institutions, we also have established a research position that can coordinate these kinds of things. And because COSTI is a big organization, we do get many requests. So how do we judge what's, best, where we can make the most impact? So I think it's about, saying this, an agency saying this is important, and then assigning somebody to actually take the lead on it.
Very important point. Thank you, Mario. Yeah. Alka. And welcome. Thank you for coming today, Alka. I don't think your microphone's on yet. You've got your hand up? Alka may be having some technical difficulty. Vince, while she figures that out, did you have anything to add
Sure.
to what Marco said?
Mario,
sorry.
Yeah. So what we've done is the way you develop relationships with academic institutions, of course, is through students, right? And leveraging the opportunities students bring and every organization, as Mario has noted, has data and information that professors, researchers want access to, or find that there is a story to be told with all that data. And if you can leverage good students, graduate students to come, right, and you develop a relationship with the academic institutions, that is a wonderful way. And we've done that with a number of different students who've helped and supported in collecting data, analyzing data, and then eventually working together with the academic institution and the professor. And it doesn't really commit. We don't need a lot of funds, right? The students get the experience, and through their placement opportunity and through their internship, and relationships are established with academic institutions, and also the data is utilized again to enhance programming, and learn about service gaps and all kinds of things. So that's one way I think that you could go ahead in using students and develop relationships.
Okay, thank you, Vince, and I'll build on that in a moment, but for the moment, let's hear from Alka. There, I can hear you now. And just as a bit of introduction, Alka has been involved in the community knowledge program basically since the days of the needs assessment. She was one of the key informants and has also been a speaker at a webinar. So did she just... There she is. Okay. Alka, what would you like to say? I see that your mic is off. Is on.
Can you
Yes,
hear
I
me?
can hear you. Yes.
Oh, okay, wonderful. I don't know what happened last couple of minutes. Everybody went mute. I did something wrong in trying to play with it. So I haven't heard what you guys said just in the last 2 minutes. So I just wanted to respond to this question about when there isn't the expertise so much, and funding is not available, how does community-based research? So I just want to share an example of what happened recently. So one of the community-based agencies reached out to us at CERC, to our engagement coordinator, who brings all the partnerships to CERC, and saying that they needed some support. And it so happens, because I do a little bit of work in the community, the person reached out to me. And so I worked for the last 4 months as a kind of lead researcher and consultant with their participants. So basically, participants in a particular program of theirs. And it was a great opportunity, I think, for me as well, because not only did I support them with the research, through weekly meetings, work, sharing all kinds of tips about research methodology, helping everybody, together as a team. We moved through all the life stages of the project, collecting the data, doing, focus groups, doing the analysis. So I feel by the end of it, um, it was a big peer learning experience for everyone. And the community-based research got a bit more credibility because they felt that there was somebody who was coming in with research expertise. And um, like it worked. It was a So sometimes it's possible to do that. Sometimes there is a little bit of money that the organization will have. They may not it will never be enough to hire an in-house researcher, but you can pay a little bit of, and if you so it was just giving an example. I just wanted to share that because it's a very recent thing that happened that I have some personal experience of.
Very helpful. Thank you. Thank you for bringing that up, Alka. Farishta, you have a response.
Not a response. I just wanted to add that and you mentioned this earlier in your presentation as well. We forget the community of practice because we generally tend to think in terms of our own social networks that are limited to the people we know. But just putting a call out for some, just a question or do you have any resources? I use settlenet.org often, and it's amazing the level of engagement and the level of knowledge that is out there. You just have to just say I need this, and three people will say, somebody from Halifax, somebody from Calgary will say, well, we've got this. Yeah, take this and you can adapt it, as long as you give the citation of where the original source was from. So I really do think that this is something that we tend to forget, that we have these communities of practice out there.
I think that's an extremely important point. There is so much knowledge. There's so many people who are willing to help. I keep seeing things floating around about if you need a research paper, just email the researcher. They're very happy to talk to you and connect. They're usually very thrilled when people are showing interest in their work. So I think what I would suggest for a lot of people who want to engage in this work, especially as this community knowledge program is winding down, if you can, go to the conferences. Um, Interact with people. I know some of us are kind of introverted and shy in situations like that, but it can be a really good opportunity just to go and listen to the presentations and maybe connect with the presenters later. They always make their contact information available. You can find out about work that they've been doing that's directly relevant to the services that you want to provide. And I know that it can be really difficult for people to get time and resources to attend these conferences, especially if they're not in the city where the workers are based. So it's been great to see more opportunities for connecting online. It's been very good to see places like settlenet.org and for bringing subject matter experts together. And like, I know that N4 has times when you can ask subject matter experts specific questions. And I know that the CAMH Immigrant and Refugee Mental Health Program makes the same thing available. So go out, familiarize yourself with the resources. If you take the Wellesley Institute course, there are a lot listed in that course. Before the program winds down, I will also be placing a list of resources on our website, which will continue to be available. So overall, a lot of it is reaching out and participating in these conversations, listening to these conversations, learning from others. And on a personal note, I would like to mention that the reason that Vince and Farishta are here today is that I was a graduate student about 10 years ago in a social work placement at COSTI Family and Mental Health. And later did a small scale research project on help-seeking behaviors in ethnocultural communities for problem gambling. We took that work and turned it into a short course to offer to people from various ethnocultural communities to help them educate their peers about the nature of the issue and what kinds of help are available. So I'm very personally grateful to Vince and Farishta for showing me the ropes when I was new to all of this, and also for being so supportive and coming today and offering their perspectives and expertise. It's very, very much appreciated. Vince, you're muted.
Yeah, well, thank you, Emily. It's been a pleasure to reconnect, and it's wonderful to hear about all the great work you've been doing at Wellesley and all the great work Wellesley does to promote community research. I think without that institutional support, we wouldn't be where we are today. So thank you.
And I just wanted to add that this is a perfect example of snowball recruitment.
Sorry, could you repeat that? I didn't quite catch it. Perfect example.
I was just saying this is a perfect example of snowball recruitment when you know
Yes.
somebody who knows somebody who knows somebody. And that's the way to do it in terms of reaching out for research projects or any kind of expertise, or you're looking for a speaker, a participant. It's just keep on asking people who you know if they know somebody else.
Exactly. And as our program winds down, we will continue to think about and probably recommend places to gather, and what you can expect from a gathering there. And I hope that everyone listening today will continue to engage with research and knowledge mobilization as they pertain to immigrant and refugee communities. We are coming to the end of our webinar. So I just wanted to thank you all again for attending today, and to let you know that we will have the transcript and the video for this event available on our webpage. And first, you've just shared something. Could you tell us what it is?
I was just typing that out, that I've just shared a link to the blueprint that I mentioned. I decided I might as well use this as a dissemination moment.
That's great. Thank you so much. And Colleen, if you could please post the link to the feedback survey in the chat that I sent earlier. If not, I can dig it up and put it in. But I really appreciate everybody's help today. Yes, thank you very much. We will also be sending the feedback survey by email to everyone who has been at any of our 3 webinars this year. So thank you again very much for joining us, and I will have this up on the website next week. And this concludes our final webinar for the Community Knowledge Program. Thank you very much to everyone who has supported us today.